What does it take to build an industrial wind turbine facility? If you are curious, watch this video and see for yourself. What you see here is the documentation of 2 years of the construction of one industrial wind turbine project in western New York. Count the trucks, count the bulldozers, the cement mixers, the excavators, the transporters, the tankers, the cranes. This video represents a few hours a week of the construction of one wind turbine facility. Multiply what you see by 37. That's how many construction sites there were to build this wind project.
The Cassadaga Wind Project area covers 40,000 acres. There are 37 turbines and about 30 miles of transmission line that will be fragmenting habitat, cutting through forests, creeks, wetlands.
Well, I believe that it's going to devaluate my property because they're putting them up right next door to my property, and I don't know what the effects of the infrasound or anything is going to be for me yet. And the wildlife that they disturbed is just unbelievable. The amount of trees they cut down is really unbelievable. Thousands and thousands of acres of trees that produce oxygen and homes for animals are just being destroyed. Putting concrete and rebar and all these 400-foot to 600-foot windmills in that are disturbing the flight patterns of ducks, geese, eagles, bats, everything. It's a crime to nature.
It breaks my heart. It really does. So when you come out here to retire and you have no say-so, devastating. They're taking semis and stuff up there, so they're building roads where no roads have ever been built before. Somebody's getting rich, and it's not the little guy.
The devastation to the environment is not worth the cost of whatever we gain, if anything, from these wind turbines. It's just not worth the cost to the environment.
Each wind turbine site begins with forest removal, forest floor clearing, scraping, mixing, moving earth, compacting earth, and the chipping of all remains. Industrial wind turbines are made of steel, aluminum, alloys, copper, rare earth metals. One wind turbine is made of 900 tons of steel. Steel is made from iron and coal, forged at high temperatures, and alloys of nickel, chromium. One turbine uses 1,000 pounds of copper. All are mined using large steel machinery. and immense quantities of fossil fuel. Bulldozers, excavators, trucks, cranes are all made of steel.
Everybody thinks that at some point in their life that government and politics doesn't impact them, it doesn't affect them, but this is a perfect example of exactly how it does. So I would say to people to pay attention, to advocate, and to understand that your quality of life is at risk. If the governor gets his way, New York State, upstate New York, the beautiful, wonderful place that we call home, will be an industrial wasteland. And not just because of wind and solar panels, but because of all the things that are going to occur after. You know, once this fad is over, and it is a fad, and once these Wall Street investment companies and foreign entities make all their money, they're going to sell what they have, which is these contracts, to the highest bidder. And we will be inundated with gravel pits and gas wells and everything else that can be harvested from our earth as a result of these mineral rights being given away with these contracts. That is the future that we are facing here in our beautiful region. And it is those folks that will be long dead or no longer in office that need to be held accountable now, so that our children and our grandchildren and future generations don't suffer like that.
Cassadaga wind is like the Arkwright wind project and the Ball Hill wind project. All three of these share a common denominator, and that is a small rural township board of trustees which has members that are either benefiting directly from the wind project or who have family members that are benefiting directly from the wind project. Now, the companies that are developing these projects do publish the names of the municipal officers, that is, the elected officers of the township, and the municipal employees. You can look it up. For both Arkwright and for the Cassadaga project, the list is extensive. I think it would be very difficult for a township to pass a protective wind law, given the fact that the members of the elected representatives and their employees are so deeply involved in receiving money from the projects. Oh, the impact on the community goes far beyond, you know, what we so often complain about is the noise of the turbines and the habitat fragmentation and the killing of avian species, birds and bats. But you have to also look at what it does to the sense of the community. It's really the fact that one neighbor is causing a loss of quality of life of an adjacent neighbor because of the fact that the turbines are making noise, blinking lights at night, and harming their domestic animals.
These things are not built without government subsidy. The electricity they generate can't be sold on the open market without perpetual government subsidy. And you know, the only people that are really benefited from it is these LLCs, these Wall Street conglomerates that have been put together for the sole purpose of profiting off the taxpayers. So when I see that, and I see that there's no real benefit, it certainly it disturbs me. They're required what are called rare earth metals. Rare earth metals are mined mostly in China under horrible conditions. It is a non-renewable source, and it is the main ingredient in making these wind turbines spin magnetically. So it's interesting to talk about the environment and renewables and everything else when these, vast majority of these windmill parts are made overseas, and the mining conditions for the rare earth metals is incredibly environmentally hazardous. As long as they're subsidized, there's no incentive for them to ever improve. they're never going to have an incentive to create more efficient windmills that can actually stand on their own. As long as the government subsidizes them, they'll continue to be money losers.
Wind developers claim a certain capacity factor for each wind project. According to the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, NYSERDA, quote, capacity factors of inland wind sites in New York are 30% of the rated capacity. Their effective capacities are actually 10% due to both the seasonal and daily patterns of the wind generation being largely out of phase with the load patterns needed, unquote. This project claims 125.5 megawatts of electricity produced. They claim this will power 51,000 homes. If you calculate using the state of New York's assessment of electricity produced, the power produced here will be anywhere between 10% and 30% of that claimed in the capacity factor. Do the math, you will find that is anywhere between 15,300 homes receiving electricity and as low as 5,100 homes. Wind turbines are held in place by cement. Each turbine uses 2,500 tons of cement to keep it upright. Cement is made of limestone, which is mined using large steel equipment. According to environmentalist George Borrello, there are huge energy costs for quarrying and transporting and converting limestone at high temperatures to make cement. According to Borrello, each ton of cement made creates 1 ton of carbon dioxide. One turbine requires 2,500 tons of cement. The fraud of the claims of wind proponents can be seen here in the repetition of the destruction and waste. The destruction and waste using materials, waste of man-hours, waste of equipment and fuel, this for months on end. The result, small amount of electricity, large profits for investors based on subsidies. 250 times more subsidy funding is given to wind and solar, according to the Wall Street Journal, than to reliable forms of energy. The waste and destruction continues, while it destroys the creatures and the places we love.
We're already 88 to 90% emissions free in upstate and western New York, so it's senseless. These projects are sold to us that they're going to be providing electricity downstate for the load centers in New York City and Long Island. It'll never get there. High voltage transmission lines cost about $1 million a mile to build, and we are lacking so much at the bulk level and the local level for all these upstate New York projects. It'll be eminent domain and years of litigation before these get built. By then, these projects will probably just about be obsolete. It's pure foolishness.
The International Energy Agency, the source of energy information for world governments, recent report states wind and solar materials require mining and industries and infrastructure that don't exist. Wind, solar, and battery technologies contain key minerals such as lithium, graphite, nickel, and rare earth metals, the demand for which is increasing, rising by 4,200%, 2,500%, 1,900%, and 700% respectively by 2040. The world doesn't have the capacity to meet demand. The IEA stipulates green energy machines use far more critical minerals than conventional energy machines do. A typical electric car requires 6 times the mineral inputs of a conventional car, and an onshore wind plant requires 9 times more mineral resources than a gas-fired power plant. The IEA notes this is a shift from a fuel-intensive to a material-intensive energy system. That means a shift away from liquids and gases whose extraction and transport leave a very light footprint on the land and are transported easily, cheaply, and efficiently. Renewables move toward big footprint mines, the energy-intensive transport of massive amounts of rocks and other solid materials, and subsequent chemical processing and refining using fossil fuels to do so. The IEA warns of the high emission intensities required. The IEA data show that, depending on the location and nature of future mines, the emissions could wipe out most of the emissions saved. Mining and mineral processing require large amounts of water, a serious issue when around half of the global lithium and copper production takes place in areas of high water stress and pose contamination risks through acid mine drainage, wastewater discharge, and the disposal of tailings.
The fact that these wind facilities, and the same is true of solar facilities, need gas backup. What we mean by that is that every kilowatt that these facilities, the wind or solar facilities are generating is intermittent. And not only that, but the frequency that the generation occurs at is unsteady. Now, a power grid can only operate at a certain frequency. That is, the cycle of alternating current must be at a very constant, steady rate. And I'm going to say that that's 60 hertz. Now, a wind facility in 1 minute may be generating power at 70 hertz. At the next minute, because the wind speed died down, now it's only generating power, but the impurity of the frequency needs to be addressed. The way they do that is they run the fossil fuel plant, in our case a gas plant. That plant has to run all the time, and it has what they call spinning reserve. Spinning reserve refers to the fact that a gas turbine is set to turn at a certain rate such that the frequency of electricity that enters the grid is the same. And it cannot vary more than 1 or 2 hertz off of that ideal 60 hertz. If we did not have spinning reserve from a thermal plant, that is a gas plant, the electricity from a wind or solar facility could be dangerous. It could enter the grid and destabilize the grid. So a dual cycle, or what is also known as combined cycle gas generation, is much more efficient than a standard gas generation plant.
Images in this video are shown in consecutive order. Dates and times are noted. Some segments are sped up to show the repetition of waste and destruction with no repeated images.
Got the governor of the New York State who's claiming that our state is going to become the manufacturing hub for wind turbine components. But there are no places in New York State where the actual raw materials are being extracted from the earth through drilling or mining, and these raw materials arrive in this country and are processed outside of New York State before they actually arrive in our state to be used in the manufacture of wind turbine parts. And we'll use the example of, for example, the cobalt, which is extremely important. It's an extremely important metal used in the manufacturing of the electronics and the magnets of these wind turbines. And the cobalt is coming into the United States, much of it from Africa, where it's being mined by children in some cases with their bare hands, in very poorly regulated or totally unregulated mines that are being run by unscrupulous companies, where you get a criminal enterprise with a mob boss running a mining consortium. Let's take a look at around the world. Let's go to China, for example. Rare earth metals are being mined and processed. Now, it's one thing to dig a huge hole in the earth to extract these rare earth metals, but it doesn't stop there, because now you need to actually smelt these metals. Smelting is the process whereby you take the ore that contains your rare earth metal and you heat it until it gets hot enough so that the metal element flows out, it runs out of the ore. And then when it cools, you've got a block of this, rare metal. Then you use this metal. They make very powerful magnets for the generators and wind turbines. Well, what do the Chinese use to create all this heat? They use coal, of course. They use coal to make to fire the giant furnaces necessary to smelt these rare earth metals. They use coal-fired electricity for other heat-required processes to smelt and refine the rare earth metals. The argument is not that these facilities don't create electricity, although it's intermittent and we don't actually know how much it is, but nonetheless, the electricity that is created merely enters the local power grid, which is already 90% free of fossil fuel generation. Now, if it enters the local grid, you cannot overload a grid with power. That means that the power from this Cassadaga wind project has to take turns with other green energy projects like the Arkwright wind project, or a solar facility somewhere, or even Niagara Falls. They all have to take turns to put their power on the grid. What is happening is that the power companies in New England do realize that the people in New England will not tolerate this level of environmental destruction, but they can purchase green credits. Green credits will be familiar to people who recall maybe 20 years ago the initiation of the pollution credits, whereby an industry could purchase these credits to pollute, but by buying the credits, that would create some sort of green habitat elsewhere aside from their polluting factory, but they would continue to pollute. And it's much the same for green energy credits. The power company in New England pays a certain amount of money to purchase the power. The power actually does not get to New England. And the reason that it doesn't get to New England is the same reason that it can't get to downstate New York, where they are 80% dependent upon fossil fuels. It's a charade that's promoted by these renewable energy credits. Now, the credits themselves are handled by major investment banks in Manhattan, in Wall Street, and they make a lot of money in the transaction.
They're still going by, little boys with excavators and that every day. It's just non-stop. I live where I can see 6 of them out my window. I have one that's at 1,700 feet from my house, 1,200 feet from my property line. And when they're testing it, it sounds like an industrial dryer. It just sits there and hums, and you do hear the swish, and it's loud. And it makes me sad, it makes me angry. I've cried over it, just to see what we've done to this beautiful land we had. It's not so much, even you can say the agriculture, but what it's done to people that have to live near this. And the money that the towns have gotten will probably be absorbed by the tax increases of everything probably in the next 2 or 3 years. So taxes will go up. So it's not even helping us in the long run. And then the green energy part, it's all false.
Massive wind installations threaten the biodiversity and ecological integrity in western New York. Large, low-energy density wind projects require extensive transmission infrastructure that destroys habitat and harms wildlife. Perpetual subsidies, massive build-outs, corporate takeover of farmland and forests all threaten our rural areas with real environmental harm. This harm is now recognized by numerous credible environmental organizations which take the protection of wildlife and nature seriously by opposing recklessly sited projects. The accelerated effort to increase the build-out of industrial wind factories is designed to favor developers at the expense of the rural residents and the poor, who will pay the higher rates and the higher taxes. Action is needed to protect our farmland, to protect our forests and wetlands, to protect our wildlife and the integrity of rural communities in western New York. Cassadaga wind workers park here at the operations headquarters on Route 60 in Charlotte, New York, before going out to the 37 work sites of the project. Do these look like local workers' cars to you?
All using, and actually there's the company too is actually out of the Netherlands. So, I mean, not only is it like out of state, it's actually a lot of the work people that are here are actually out of the country. So there's, we have issues as far as the labor goes, not being local, and that's an issue for us. Texas, Oregon, California, Maine. Jimmy said he's Illinois, and that's the only ones. Pennsylvania. Other than that, I can't think of any other ones. And there's also an issue too. They don't have DOT placards and also DOT numbers as far as commercial hauling.